welcome to the International Water Resources Association webinar on peering into the crystal ball, the future of water. We thank everyone for joining us here today. We have a really great panel of both experienced, wise people in the water world, but also some younger voices that are dynamic. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot from them in the next 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how long they want to stick around with us. So we have Cecilia Tortajada, professor in practice of environmental innovation, the School of Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of Glasgow, and as well as an adjunct senior research fellow at the Institute of Water Policy at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Anita Milman, associate professor, water governance, Department of Environmental Conservation, School of Earth and Sustainability, University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Hussam Hussein, lecturer and research fellow of International Relations, Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford, and Salman MA Salman, chair of the University of Khartoum Council and editor of Brill Research Perspectives on International Water Law. And finally, moderated by Renée Martin-Nagle, PhD and CEO at Ripple Effects, as well as special counsel at Ecker Siemens, and finally, treasurer for the IWRA. So we have, like I said, a really dynamic and experienced group with us here today. Now, this is a webinar hosted by the International Water Resources Association, and the IWRA is an international network of researchers and practitioners who work on a multidisciplinary range of water resource issues. We provide a global knowledge-based forum for bridging disciplines and geographies by connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, and institutions who are concerned with the sustainable use of the world's water resources. So now this webinar today here is going to pick up on the IWRA's 50th anniversary celebration, which happened last year. We had a lot of people don't know how long we've been around, and 50 years is a long time. So we're really happy to celebrate that in many different ways. And one of the ways that we celebrated was by publishing a special issue of our flagship journal, Water International, which focused on past, present, and future ideas for water. So this webinar today is going to feature 4 contributors from this special issue, and they're going to discuss some of the critical issues related to the world's water resources and then the role of IWRA in the coming decades. So just to explain the format of today's webinar, we're going to have the presentations, and then we're going to try to come and have enough time for audience questions at the end of the event. So please, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the box, question box at the bottom of your Zoom, and we'll be able to try to get to them at the end. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn the floor over to our moderator, someone who has a great deal of experience in the water sector as well as beyond, and turn the floor over to Renée Martin-Nagle.
Thanks so much, Scott, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're very excited about this webinar, and I thought I should explain the format a little bit. Each of our presenters is going to introduce their topic in sort of 5 to 7 minutes, and then the group will engage in a discussion of that topic. And as Scott said, we're going to try to leave some time at the end for questions from the audience. So feel free to pose your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom screen. And so without further ado, I'm going to let Cecilia start. Cecilia, you did not contribute a piece to an article to the special issue for our 50th anniversary, but you were one of the very active co-editors, and you've been involved in the water sector for many years, including as president of IWRA. And so we're just really honored to have your thoughts to start us off on the future of water.
Thank you, Renée, and thank you very much for the invitation to join this IWRA webinar today, and a large conversation considering the people who are joining us. Scott, if you don't mind sharing my one slide presentation, please, if you can.
Let's give it a try.
Thank you so much. I will be talking today on the future of water resources and the future of the water sector. And for this, I am using the framework proposed in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment back in 2005, except that my comments will be on water and the water sector rather than on environment. In the topic of water, the future of water doesn't look bright. There are problems, and there will be more problems because water resources are scarcer and polluted, and because the number of users and users continue increasing. Now, I want you to focus your attention on the boxes on the right-hand side, where it says indirect drivers of change, and below that one, direct drivers of change. Our most important direct driver of change is climate change, of course, because it is changing the rules of the game. For many years, most of the water problems, of governance problems, of policy problems have been in the developing countries. However, with climate change and less resources as less water resources, less precipitation, and the fact that they have become less reliable, then we don't know, our planning changes. We don't know if all those dams we have been constructing in order to collect water, if they would be filled. We don't know if we will have enough water for agriculture, for energy. We see now in the United States the drought, the extended drought, and we have droughts in every part of the world, and we have floods. So this is a main change. It's not, water is not only an issue of developing countries, water is a global issue. And as such, there is now attention on water at the political level, which is very positive, because that is likely to bring, or likelier to bring, more positive outcomes. If we see the list we have in the indirect drivers of change, we have demographic aspects, but it's not only the demography, it is, which of course is important, but it's also the population growth. We don't know how many people will be in the world. There is a difference of about 2 billion people before the estimates of United Nations and the estimates of the group who have been studying the topic of population, and but not within UN. So we have a difference of 2 billion people. How do we plan in terms of water resources for more or less 2 billion, which is a very large number? The economic aspects, we know that globalization and trade, and I'm not talking about virtual aspects. I am talking about actual situations. And we know that with globalization, we have more products going around. We know that we have more exchange in the world. And we know that we need to produce to respond to markets. And for that, we need all inputs. And water is the most important input, in addition to human resources, of course. But we have a very important one, which is the policy framework. The policy frameworks, as well as the governance and the institutional and legal frameworks that we have in the line below, they are still not robust enough. We don't have enough systems that are robust enough for droughts, for floods, or for everyday events when they come out of the normal, and even many times not even doing the normal. We are hoping that technology will solve problems in terms of supply, for example, in terms of pollution, except that those problems will not be solved if we don't have policies, if we don't have governance and institutional and legal frameworks, and if we do not implement them, and we don't have them. By now, we should have the policies we suggest, for example, from the academia, they should be acceptable for politicians. And we don't recognize it because we think that we shouldn't get involved in politics, except unless we work together with policy makers, with politicians. The studies we are developing in the academia, they will not be used.
Cecilia, you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you. So if we think again in what is the future for water, when in reality is what is the future for humankind with sources of water that are polluted, scarce, with more uses, and for which there is still no agreement how to manage them, not locally, not nationally, and much less internationally. We have had for years, for decades, the idea that water resources should be managed at the level of the basins. That, of course, is a very good idea, except it has not happened. What else? What else can we do? What should be our unit of management so that water resources are better managed? And once we find and we decide and we can work at this level, then the water resources we will have will be cleaner, and we will have them for more users. Water is very local. And so our framework should be also made considering the context, not considering only global aspects, but considering the local context. And with that, I finish, Renee. Thank you again.
Right on time. To get the group discussion started, I'm going to pose a question to you, Cecilia, and that is, who are the new users of water and why is that a concern?
One of the big new uses of water, Renee, is the communication sector, not only IT, information technology, but ICT, information communication technology sector. It has been growing very much because we all depend on them. It's estimated that from the 18 billion devices that required internet globally in 2018, by 2030, this figure will increase to 30 billion. This requires infrastructure. And these data centers, they have been built around the world, different places, to provide millions of servers, as all of us, the services that we require. For this, we need electricity, we need cooling, and we need water, because it is with water that the cooling systems are provided. And in some cases, almost 60% of the water that is used for cooling purposes is potable water. It is estimated that the billions of searches we do in search engines, most of us use Google, but many people use Baidu in all the search engines. These represent, they use the same amount of electricity and corresponding amount of water that thousands of households. So are we willing to stop using, to stop connecting, so that water is not scarce for individuals? And that is a big question. There are several big users, but this is the largest one. And it is of concern because we are starting to depend on them for communication, not only during COVID, but for communication. But this means energy and this means water that has already been allocated for other uses.
And we're all aware of the average figures of, 70% of fresh water is used for agriculture, 20% for industry, 10% for domestic purposes. But it sounds like industry is about to increase this percentage based purely on electronics and the internet.
And it is, for example, in the case of US, and France is another example. Now, most of the largest user is electricity, it's not agriculture, for example. Precisely because what you said, there are new users, so water is used differently. And about irrigation, we tend to repeat that the irrigation sector is wasteful, but perhaps it's not wasting. Perhaps if we see it as a system, yes, we have to improve the way water is used in irrigation, but there are places where we have drip irrigation, and the system itself, if we see it at the micro level, it has become more efficient. However, if you don't irrigate, the water doesn't percolate into the aquifers, and then you don't have the recharge into the aquifers. So it's not that, yes, of course, it should be used more efficiently, but not to the point that you don't have the recharge to the aquifers. Or what happened between Mexico and US when US constructed in one of the borders, the canal, and the moment you put concrete, you don't have a seepage to groundwater, to the aquifers. And then people downstream, they have the impact. We have more water supplies. Water is being produced not only through desalination, but recycling wastewater, which has been proved that it is safe. But is that amount that is being supplied enough? And it will never, any amount of water will be enough if we don't manage demand. So it is also in demand, not only in the irrigation sector, but industrial sector and also domestic sector that we should improve to have enough water for endless times.
Anita, Hussam, Salman, do you have any comments on what Cecilia has said? Salman?
Yeah, Cecilia, you mentioned this new user and you give an interesting description. As Renée mentioned, that the agricultural sector is just the single largest user, has always been and will always continue 70 to 75%. But at the same time, it's being described widely as one of the most inefficient users. A lot of waste, lots of problems. Do you think that the new users are aware of those problems, are addressing them, or are we going to gradually fall in the same trap of the inefficient use of the agriculture sector?
That is an excellent question, Salman, because it needs to be done. I mean, the fact that the users have to become consumers or users have to become more efficient. Industry tends to be more efficient because you can set a closed system, and there are companies that have become much more efficient, the so-called water positive, because they are recycling the water and reusing it for their own purposes. And at the end, they end up discharging what they don't need, or they sell it to another industry. So we hope that these new users, they become more efficient, but for that you need regulation. And if the regulation exists and there is a system through which the companies are made liable to this efficiency, it will happen, but if not, it will not. And this happens also in developing countries. In Mexico, one of the Nestle factories in very dry areas, they are very water efficient because there is a policy that pushes them, if not by the city or the place where they are, but certainly by the company. It's a policy of the company to be more energy and water efficient. So what we need is policies and the framework so that the industry becomes more efficient. And in case of irrigation, is much more complex because there are many million people involved in a system that has been inefficient for a long time. And it can be done, it's going to take longer.
Anita, Hussam, do you have something to say?
Yes. Okay, Anita, go ahead.
Okay, I agree that this is a very interesting conundrum as the demands and the locations in which water is being used are changing. How do we adapt to them, and where are the points of entry within which we can encourage change so that people become more efficient? And so that we can possibly transfer who is using water when. I'd like to also add that water scarcity is not the only problem. In fact, we have many areas of the world where the amount of water is actually increasing, and flooding is becoming a large problem, as well as changing in the timing of when water is available. And I think that those combined are actually big drivers of challenges as well as potential opportunities as well. And thinking about the fact that we need to come up with systems so when there is variability, we can take advantage of water when it's there, as to prepare for when water is less available, as well as to think about how do we address the fact that too much water can be damaging both to agriculture, to industry, and to human systems. So just putting out there some additional challenges.
Yeah,
and you are very right. It will be an opportunity as long as you have a framework already. Because that flexibility we talk about in terms of institutions, that is very difficult to achieve. You should have this dialogue between institutions. You should have an interest of the countries to address the challenges, in this case, water, but any challenge from the point of view of the region or the country, not by sector. Because if you don't have these institutional frameworks, then you cannot take advantage of these opportunities and they come and go. That is absolutely true. So we have to develop, we have to start thinking more. It's not a system, but we tend to go, I guess it's in every sector. In terms of water, somebody coins a concept and then everybody jumps and then everybody repeats it. And then people's needs are lost into the stakeholdership and needs are lost into very fancy wording, and poverty is forgotten. And we go ahead with concepts. So if we go back, what do we need? We need institutions. We need policies. We need to work with users. We need to see the needs of people. We need to address development goals, not the sustainable development goals, but the goals that have existed always, which have been poverty alleviation, your goals of health, your goals of service provision, and not to get lost in all of fancy wording. And the more robust the institutions are, the more one will be able to take the opportunities you just mentioned, because then your system is prepared and it will take you less time in order to mobilize and be able to take those opportunities.
Okay, Hussam, we have about a minute left.
Okay, great. I mean, reflecting on the global challenges that you are mentioning, it came to mind also the rural-urban transformations and the growing cities that we have. which become even more relying on food imports and therefore virtual water imports from abroad, especially. But like as you were also saying, it's also very important to reflect on which type of water are we importing. So is it treated wastewater or non-renewable groundwater resources? So, but what the latest research is also helping us with is to map and to understand which kind of food we are importing and how water friendly it is. So I think that that could also help us in shaping policies and shaping decisions on which kind of food and water we consume.
True, but with this import, just a very brief comment, Renée, because we tend to see things with the eyes of water, except we should see them with the eyes of reality. If we import a tomato or a zucchini or whatever we import, we are not bringing water. We are bringing food, right? That's what we are bringing. And in the process, one can conceptualize it in terms of virtual water, virtual energy, but jobs. Because if you are importing, that means that jobs are being created on the other side. So it's not about water. It's about the concept, and you need to feed people. Are you going to worry whether there is a drought in the other place? Perhaps you leave it to the other ones. And I'm not saying it's not right or wrong, but efficient or more efficient, but it's not about water. It is about development, and it is about if me as Kenya or as Colombia, as developing countries, I can sell flowers. And for that, I use my water, but I can provide jobs, and those are going to go to export. Then you know what? I'm going to buy them here, or I will buy my daffodils that grow here. But that will not be related to water. That is required. That is a broader consideration. So I think, and these topics on these discussions on the virtual water is broader. It's not water. It's water, energy, jobs, sunlight. It's land. It's pollution. It's fertilizer. And because we cannot go into every input, then perhaps we should see it as development. But that is the way I see it.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next topic. And Hussam, I'm glad that you mentioned the transfer from rural living to urban living, because that leads us right into Anita's topic, which is the future of piped water. And Anita, I know that Scott gave an introduction of you, but I should also mention that you are the chair of the IWRA Groundwater Task Force. So in addition to knowing a lot about piped water, you also know a lot about groundwater. So go ahead with your slides and your presentation, please.
Great, thank you. So for many people around the world, piped water on premise is a magical thing. For a substantial portion of these people, the magic occurs is that they turn on the tap and presto, piped clear liquid comes out. For a smaller portion of people around the world, piped water is magical because even though they know of it, they've yet to fully experience it in their daily lives. And for me, piped water is magical because creating, operating, and maintaining piped water systems is immensely challenging. And somehow we've managed to provide it to a substantial portion of the world's population. But as I'll mention, much remains to be done. So Sustainable Development Goal 6.1 aspires to achieve universal and equitable access to safely managed water by 2030. So safely managed refers to water that is free from contaminants, available when needed, and on premises. Piped water supply is in many ways the ultimate end goal. And to date, we've had substantial progress in achieving this. In 2017, 4.8 billion people, so about 63% of the global population, had access to piped water on premise. It was a 37% increase since 2000. Unfortunately, though, many of these water systems are in a state of tenuous stability. About 1 billion people receive water from systems that provide intermittent supply, and some estimates suggest that 40% of systems are not functioning at any given moment. Small and/or rural systems fare particularly poorly in these regards. So key to the future of piped water is going to be to continue to expand service while also ensuring the sustained functioning of these existing systems. And the barriers are substantial. Common stressors include climate change, population growth, water quality degradation, and they're exacerbated by the weak financial status and limited capacity of many water systems, which reduces their ability to prepare for these stressors. So in my remaining few minutes, I just want to briefly touch on 3 separate but interrelated components of piped water supply, infrastructure, management, and finances, talking about how these relate to the future of piped water. So infrastructure comprises the heart of pipe systems. This includes source water intakes, water treatment facilities, storage tanks, transmission and distribution lines, etc. And failing in any one of these parts of the system can result in a disruption. They can limit the supply or they can provide unsafe water. Three primary challenges to infrastructure include the need to employ greater or different treatment methods to address increasing water quality concerns and to reduce the potential impact of disinfection byproducts. There's also a need to respond to changes in demand and how those affect supply needs, as well as service quality characteristics such as pressure and residence time within the system, and the need to maintain and repair poorly sized, maintained, and aging infrastructure. So fortunately, we have the knowledge to address many of these challenges. Many water suppliers are looking at multiple barrier approaches to address water quality. And we've made vast technological improvements in sensors and treatment methods that can help us avoid infrastructure failures. Unfortunately, however, to take advantage of these opportunities, we need a certain amount of capacity. So this gets to my next point, which is for water systems to provide high quality and sustained service, they must be effectively managed. This includes addressing the day-to-day operations of water infrastructure, but also ensuring regulatory compliance, engaging in strategic planning in relation to assets, contingencies, and emergencies. And the challenges here are many. Managerial and technical expertise is often lacking. Water systems are facing human resource challenges and employing people that have the training and the wherewithal to manage a system. And further, in many instances, proper water management is undermined by political maneuvering. Water often becomes the object of politics, such that long-term management decisions are affected by short-term objectives of electoral cycles. Now, fortunately, there's been increased attention to managerial effectiveness. We now know that the context in which water systems operate is important. Countries can improve their water system management by putting in place and enforcing laws, regulations, administrative norms, and really guiding performance while sheltering water systems from rent-seeking and political interference. We also know that fomenting public awareness of the value of water is important, and increasing public support for a well-managed system can put pressure on officials and workers to achieve it. And there are also increased efforts to develop novel partnerships and training initiatives that can help to build capacity, including peer-to-peer network and assistance programs. But good management and properly maintained operating infrastructure requires money. Estimated investments to meet the sustainable development goals for water are $1.7 trillion by 2030, and this does not include the cost to maintain the existing status quo. So here, unfortunately, water systems are plagued by three common challenges. Most are chronically Most are chronically underfunded. They don't achieve full cost recovery, so they're reliant on transfers, particularly for new capital expenses. Second, there's often little political will to provide new investments. Most politicians and many voters have little interest in spending more money on water, slightly changing over time, but an issue still. And lastly, affordability of tariffs is increasingly a concern, particularly for low-income households. So there have been some recent innovations here that can provide some new opportunities. Already present in some places, countries are developing revolving funds, which provide low-interest loans for drinking water systems. And at the investor level, a global focus on sustainable finance is leading to new opportunities for green bonds that can serve as a form of financing. And government agencies are working to develop new forms of blended finance that can help minimize risk and encourage flows of funds to the water sector. So in sum, there's been large gains and expansions of piped water systems, as well as in innovations of water supply technologies. But continued and sustained deployment of these advances is going to require increases in human and organizational capacity, as well as financial resources. So key to the future success will be a prioritization of water supply among the many challenges that society faces. And the public benefits of safe, reliable piped water are huge. We just need to direct our political will, our institutions, our resources, and our ingenuity to the issue. And if we do, I think we can make the magic happen. We just have to make sure that it's our priority.
Perfect timing. Thank you. I'm a member of my town's water authority, and so the issues that you are discussing are very real to me, and I agree with you completely. And to get us started, I'd like to ask you a question. What are the key policy debates that you think we need to engage in order to address piped water?
I think there are a number of key policy debates that are coming up. Funding is a large portion of this. There's been a push over the years for operate water supply systems as an independent business, and the goal to make them fully cost recovery. And while this is in some ways ideal from an economic perspective, it may not be feasible. There are questions about the need for transfers across customers to help to subsidize the cost for low-income customers. And there's also some need for investments and capital investments that may be hard to cost recover. On the other hand, water is a public good, and it is very important for both livelihoods, health, and the economy. And so there are some good reasons we might want to actually have transfers and actually paying to cover the public costs. And another big debate is just about the model for service provision entirely, which is, should we have systems that are expected to provide 24-hour-a-day service of a fully potable water system when a lot of the water, as Cecilia was mentioning, is not being used for drinking water or for human consumption? And maybe there are ways in which we can look at alternative sources of supply or alternative ways in which we manage the system so that we can prioritize the high quality water for the immediate needs and looking at other ways of meeting our other water needs.
There's also the trend from public ownership of water utilities to private ownership. But I'll open up the floor to the other panelists for now. Does any of you have any comments that you want to make on Anita's presentation?
Yes, I do. I like your presentation very much. And I like very much the last comment you made before you finish, which is this should be a priority. And why it wouldn't be a priority if it is an essential service? And it is because it's very complex. And many times it's not that, because one tends to say, to think in terms of pipe water, supply water, that it should be, and if it is not done, it's because the politicians don't want it to happen, but it's more complex than that. And I think one should learn more of the situation, like Renée says, where you are more in contact with the situation in your councils. In that way, one can start by understanding the complexity, the problem, one can start solving them. Because it's true that many times there is no political will, because that requires many changes, and many times politicians are not willing to do. But many times it comes to institutional capacity, and that is more difficult to solve. Or many times it's the fact that you don't have the people. And I remember, well, many times, but we have seen people who come and go, people who are not trained enough. You have to reskill, and reskilling cost. And as the technology has become more sophisticated, you need different type of operators. Can you train them? But I think it's a very relevant topic, the one you just presented.
I think this question about institutions and also about human capacity is huge. I can tell you, I work with a lot of small water systems around the United States, and there are not young people going into the field. They're having trouble finding trained operators that can operate the system, maintain it, and respond to some of the regulatory constraints. In part, that's because the pay for them isn't very good. So people that are bright and engaged go into other fields. But the issue is in larger areas, it's a lot easier for people to find the people that are trained that can help to maintain and operate and work within the system. But in smaller areas and rural areas, not just in the US, but around the world, the question is, it's not necessarily, it requires expertise to operate a water system, to make sure that you are following along, tracking the quality of water within the system, looking for leaks, doing repairs. And we need to find ways in which we make this a valued profession, as well as ensure that the people that get hired into the position are interested in performing their duties. So that's a big constraint. I can talk about institutions, but let others in the panel talk.
Hussam?
Yes, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I focus mainly, usually, I mean, my main focus is on arid regions and arid countries. So like the issue of scarcity of water resources is quite key. And what I find quite interesting in my research is to analyze, for instance, in the case of Jordan, which is a very centralized country, the decisions concerning the trade-offs between that the government has to do, the ministry has to do in deciding when reallocating water and pumping water from, for instance, from one region to another, or from one sector to another, which is, and therefore like the political economy, the interests of different groups, which often prevail on efficiency or other kind of considerations. So yeah, I mean, I was trying to, apply what you were saying to my research and my region, yeah, I mean, I find it quite challenging to overlap the political economy considerations with considerations of efficiency, especially in the financial sector, as you were saying. Yeah, I mean, it's just a comment. It's just a reflection. It's not really a question.
Yeah, and this is an interesting challenge because many water suppliers are part of municipal government or they're part of regional government. And so the regional government has trade-offs in terms of the many competing demands on their time. There's healthcare, there's schools, there's roads. And so there are challenges in that they have to make a decision when they're going to invest in the water supply versus when they're going to put their resources and capacity into other pressing issues. And often a water system is partly functioning or more or less functioning. And so there's a tendency to ignore it and allow for deferred maintenance and other issues while attention is on other priorities. And that just leads to further degradation of the system. Often also the areas that are the most well-to-do or most centralized within the community have the best water access. So they don't necessarily notice where the degradation is occurring in the other parts of the system. And so there are challenges also in thinking about how do we balance, and this is it's a distribution system with pipes. And so you've got to manage the different geographies within the system as well.
Salman, I think you had a comment?
Yes, I have a comment, and my comment related to what Anita said about the funding and the need for funding. I remember in the Kyoto World Water Forum in 2001, the IMF issued a famous report about the funding needs for the water sector to continue sustainably delivering reasonable amount of water to the need of the world. And I think they put the figure as 1 trillion for the next 25 years, which is approaching now. Should end in 2025. So my question to Anita is any of this funding, has it been coming during the last 20 years or so, and how much of it, and what effect did it have on the overall delivery of water to the needy people, or to continue with sustainable development, sustainable delivery to the already existing communities?
I will start by saying that I have not studied or tracked global flows of finance as they relate to water resources. So I cannot give you a fully informed answer on this, but I will say that a lot of the sources for funding of water are piecemeal. They come from, within a country, they come from taxes or from bond measures or other things like that. From the international perspective, where we're looking at that, they're coming from development organizations, be those bilateral and or nonprofit. And some of them are coming from the multinational banks. And there it's a project pipeline issue, as well as an agreement of who's going to be transferring the money to where and what are the purposes of that. And so I think that just like it's very difficult to track whether or not climate finance is going into the desired places and what impact it's having, tracking the water finance sector is quite challenging because it's hard to keep track of all these different actors if they're not actually inventorying it. And often what happens is they track expenditures when the system is built, and they don't keep long-term records to see whether or not 5 years later the water system is still functioning. And so many water systems, there's money for them to get up and running, and then as soon as they're up and running, it's in the hands of the people that are there. And so this ongoing operations and maintenance is where the challenge arises.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but I will say that some of the statements that you made are relating to publicly owned water utilities. But there is a trend here in the US and elsewhere in the world for private entities to take over treatment and delivery of water, which is a different financial model. But I'm sorry, we could go on and on about that. Maybe we will later.
Yeah, and there's both. The trend has been in both directions. Actually, there's been a lot of recapturing by the public sector or the private sector, and so a lot of smaller systems are also private and not recognized as private. So it's a very complicated trend to dissect, but yes, it is related to the finances for sure.
Yeah. Okay, Hussam, it's your turn. Yeah, you and I met when we were both PhD students, and like I told you earlier, every time I turn around, you've got another publication. And so you submitted one for our 50th anniversary special issue, and I'd like for you to discuss that topic, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation to speak today. Yes, the publication that we published, Dr. Kevin Wheeler and myself, is titled Water Research and Nationalism in the Post-Truth Era. And it's basically the result of some reflections and discussions that we had in the past years, and then we decided to write about this topic. We basically realized that something new is happening that deserves attention: the growing power of misinformation and its effect on the field of water studies and water research. This is particularly important today in the context of globalization and the role of social media, which is growing in disseminating information. So firstly, water research and academia on water studies is particularly influential, and it's able to shape policies. And this happens in different ways. For instance, research has highlighted challenges to water scarcity, water justice, and distributional impacts, and has therefore shaped policies to try to address these issues. But also assessing or challenging popular beliefs and narratives, such as the one on water wars. We probably all remember in the past decades, reading on mass media, but also listening to politicians speaking about water wars. But those that, I mean, probably most of us here that work in the water field of research also know quite well that research has also confirmed and demonstrated that it's not correct to speak of water wars, because research has demonstrated that historical cooperation and conflict over water, it's basically more frequent to have cooperation related than water, and that we never had a water war. So, I mean, the role of academia is important in shaping policies and in addressing policies. But it's also true that the other way around, meaning that water policies can be influential in shaping our research and the research of academics. Also, for instance, through funding. So, I mean, policymakers and governments can make available funding on determined teams, and therefore shape the type of research and the topic of research done in their countries. For instance, national level objectives, such as increasing agricultural production, can often result in opening new departments on studying how to achieve such agricultural intensification. But also, for instance, today, probably more relevant is achieving the climate change national target about emissions or other climate change related issues that often result in support to research done on this topic, and therefore shaping the type of research on these issues. We found that the concept of hydraulic mission is also very important, which basically is the notion of resource nationalism, which describes the desire by states to gain maximum national advantage from the exploitation of their natural resources. And in particular, we found that the discourse of water nationalism can be used to justify and legitimize a state's water policy or projects, or, I mean, often is the construction of dams to achieve that maximum gain, and therefore using water nationalism to try to find support, popular support from their citizens to support their projects in such as a dam. We see water nationalism growing particularly strong in regions where economic growth is attributed to the state's ability to control water resources. This is quite linked to the concept of securitization, but water nationalism, we feel, extends far beyond governments to include, so it's more hegemonic to include the civil societies, universities, and the general public, and therefore really the role of narratives and the role of academia is very important in supporting this water nationalism, governmental water nationalism. This is also even more important when it comes to transboundary water resources and transboundary research and projects. And in this context, I mean, we know that transboundary water issues are very complex because they transcend obviously political and also often sectorial sectors. So the transboundary aspect makes things more complex and more challenging. But the trend of water nationalism that I was mentioning makes and complicates these issues even further when, for instance, influential academic or researchers advocate for solutions by looking only through one single lens. And the growing challenge is therefore really to distinguish facts from opinion and to recognize that misinformation is real and is happening in the era of mass information. Therefore, the challenges that we have identified in academia for academics are firstly the scientific publication process, with the growing pressure on academics to publish, the role of predatory journals also, which usually push for quantity over quality, especially when there's the open access fees, mandatory open access fees. So that's one of the challenges, but also the growing number of publishing outlets and the peer review process. As we all know, we dedicate voluntary time to this important process of peer review. And therefore, I mean, often some reviewers might pay less attention, or also they might not be the right reviewers for that specific piece. And so the solutions, I mean, that we could all try to support are firstly, the type of research that we do. So try to, especially for transboundary research, support collaborative research, both from, I mean, from the very early stages, from the design of the research to the data collection and analysis. So bringing people together from different sectors or from different countries. Funding also is quite important, obviously, to conduct research, but funding can support regional academic cooperation, which is something that's also already happening. For instance, funding from the European Union is often supporting regional cooperation on shared basins. And then roles of exchanges and the university programs that bring people from different countries together. And we are probably all aware of some leading programs in this field, in this direction. But also, and finally, given, I mean, the IWRA and the leading journals such as Water International, that has, so the role of editors and journals in choosing the reviewers, but also us as reviewers in trying to capture the nuances and in trying to show the issues and suggest to look at the issues from different perspectives. So those are, I mean, I think I will stop here because I'm running out of time, but those I think are the key messages of our piece that was just published in Water International.
Thank you, Hussam. And to get the conversation started, I'm going to pose a question to you. In settings where water nationalism is high, to what extent have youth, academics, or other non-state actors been able to build common understandings and solutions for the shared water problems?
Well, thank you. I think that's a great question. And two things come to mind in particular. One is, well, is the way we met, me and Renée. We met when we were both PhD students, and we went to Uruguay in a workshop studying the Guarani aquifer system. I mean, there we learned, or at least I learned about how the Guarani aquifer system came to be in, I mean, as a unified aquifer system. And my understanding is that in the past, in the 80s, academics and policymakers in the region looked at the Guarani as not as a regional and transboundary aquifer, but they thought it was different aquifers that did not transcend the national borders. But then the epistemic community and the academics had a key role because they came together, and by collaborating and exchanging data and information, they realized that the Guarani was actually a unified aquifer system, which was regional and transboundary. So this is one example of epistemic community and academics coming together regionally. But then I just published with several colleagues and friends that are youth activists in the water sector. And I mean, they were leading this research, which has just been was just published in February this year in Water International, which looked at the role of youth in the water sector. And we identified that we organized a workshop a couple of years ago in Cairo, where we brought young water activists and experts from different parts of the world and belonging to different youth organizations. And we try to identify the challenges, but also the current roles that they have in their water community in their countries. And we identified also the role of connector and enabling leader and cross-boundary team leader, which is basically the figure of a young water activist leader that brings together people from different countries or different sectors within the same basin. And just to name a few, I mean, there's the Water Youth Network, as well as the Central Asian Youth for Water and the Mediterranean Youth for Water Network, which have been very successful in bringing people and young people from different countries, for instance, in Central Asia, from different countries that share the basins of the Aral Sea, bringing them together to discuss the problems and I think, and also possible solutions. I think that was, and there's many others, good examples of opportunities that youth, for instance, can play, and bottom-up initiatives to bring people from different countries together to discuss and build dialogue and the trust that often it's more difficult to achieve at the governmental level.
Thank you. And as you know, IWRA is committed to having youth voices heard in our activities, which is one of the reasons why we have you and Anita on this webinar. And does anyone else have any comments that they would like to make on Hussam's presentation or his response to that question?
I would like to make a comment, not on Hussam's presentation, but in a comment he made before to Anita's presentation, and which was very relevant, and it is how the governments allocate water. And many times it's depending on the emerging need, on your urgency in that moment. And that is not the best way to plan. I'm not in the government. They face many constraints, but water allocation needs to be looked at. And from the academia, if we could contribute to it, I think we should do it. Because we tend to think again as water as the only sector, except the water sector is so weak. It doesn't compare in terms of importance to energy, for example, that the water sector reacts more to other sectors' needs. And there is where there is, even though it has been studied for a while, allocation, but it needs further study. And that's a comment that Hussam made.
Salman, you had something to say too?
It's okay.
Okay, you're unmuted. Anita?
I'll just weigh in that I'm hearing across all three of the presentations this need for people to raise a voice, and we often talk about the need to educate and for awareness, but I think what is really equally important is to bring together these epistemic communities to form dialogues, not necessarily for the purposes of education, but that's part of it, but for the purpose of helping to put public pressure out there to make known what the challenges are, because that's how policy and politics happen, is through pressures, through hegemonic thinking, through changing the ways. Sustainability wasn't on the agenda until the Brundtland report, and now climate change, it took a very long time for climate change to get on there. And I think that by getting people together in these networks, by having academics as well as industry and the youth be involved in this and helping to put this on the policy agenda, that's where change is going to happen. So I agree with many of the things that Hussein has said.
Any parting thoughts, Hussam, before we move on?
No, I was just reflecting also on the role of narratives, no? So I was also reading in the chat the role of images that governments often use to further alienate or also further, call for support and therefore alienate the other countries And I'm not referring to any basin in particular, but that's something that happens across, like in different basins that come to mind. And so we always need to be wavy and try to look at the problem from different perspectives. So try to understand what is our narrative, hegemonic narrative, but also try to understand and listen, be ready to listen to the others to try to better understand holistically the problem that we are trying to understand and address.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Last but certainly not least is Salman Salman. And Salman, you were the first person I met in groundwater more than 10 years ago. I view you as one of the godfathers of water, and you've just been active for so many years, and we're really lucky to have your perspective on this panel. So I will turn it over to you, and you ask a provocative question: what role can IWRA play in resolving conflicts? So I'll turn it over to you.
The question I'm posing is, should IWRA play any role in international water disputes? I should start with the point that, yes, I agree that the trend is largely on international water courses towards cooperation. That's a general trend, and we have seen it during the years of the development and ratification process for the Water Courses Convention and a number of regional treaties, but there are still a number of disputes that are rising. They are growing in number and growing in complexity, and there is settlement institutions. And a large part of those disputes relate to the boundary rivers and where to draw the border lines. And a number of cases have reached the ICJ, started with the Kasakili-Sududu dispute between Botswana and Namibia, where they had a dispute over where the boundary lies on the Chobe River, one of the tributaries of the Zambezi, and the case ended up in the ICJ, International Court of Justice. It was the first case on international waters to get to the ICJ, and then it was followed by a series of similar disputes where to draw the boundaries across the river. The Niger River dispute, the Lake Chad dispute, and recently the San Juan dispute between Nicaragua and Costa Rica, which is a very interesting dispute, has been going back and forth to the ICJ. So all of those disputes were decided by the ICJ, and but there are also the water quality and pollution disputes, the Rhine River between Netherlands and France, the Uruguay River, the pulp mills between Argentina and Uruguay, and the Rhine went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. The Uruguay River went to the ICJ. Then there is the All-American Canal between Mexico and USA, which interestingly was referred to the US District Court in Las Vegas. However, the more difficult ones and the ones that are still persisting are the dams, starting with the Gabčíkovo-Nagumoris dispute between Hungary and Slovakia that went to the ICJ, and ICJ sent it back to the two countries, giving certain instructions about the treaty still in force and certain instructions, and it went back and forth. And then there is the Baglihar dispute, or there was the Baglihar dispute between India and Pakistan, and that's part under the Indus Waters Treaty. And actually, it was the Baglihar difference that really started raising the question in my mind as to whether the International Water Resources Association should play a role in international disputes. The Baglihar difference related to the dam that India was building and Pakistan opposed, and they couldn't resolve the dispute through the Indus Commission. They couldn't agree on a third party to resolve the dispute or an institution to resolve the dispute. And when I'm putting an underline on the institution, because that's when IWRA jumped to my mind. And then they finally referred the matter to the World Bank. I was the water law advisor at that time, so the whole thing fell on my lap as the issue relates to the Indus Waters Treaty. And we spent a lot of time. The treaty says that if the parties are unable to agree on a neutral expert and on a third party, then the World Bank should appoint it. And we spent a lot of time trying to find a process, putting in place a process for appointing the neutral expert and agreeing on the neutral expert and getting the two parties to agree. And as I said earlier, it's where I jumped to my mind that that was in 2005. I have been a member of the IWRA since 1994, and that was the question arose. Wouldn't it have been very easy for everyone, for the Indians, Pakistanis, the World Bank, and the world community, that the IWRA would be the one to supervise, not to supervise the process, because the process is under the treaty, the World Bank is the one that's supposed to do. But wouldn't it have been better for everyone that the IWRA would jump in with all the expertise they had, now 3,000 members, engineering, economics, law, finance, management, dispute settlement? Couldn't the IWRA play a better role than we played, and in a more timely manner? And because we spent a lot of time, we put together a number of engineers. The neutral expert, according to the treaty, should be a highly qualified engineer. And so we
2 minutes, Salman.
2 minutes. So, and then there are the Kishinganga and the Ratli, again, the PCA and the neutral expert. And then the GERD, the Grand Stupid Resistance Dam, which went to the Security Council, interesting enough. And then we have currently the AU mediation. So the question that I'm raising is, should IWRA play a role? If so, what role? For example, in the Baglihara, I said the selection of the neutral expert. In the Kishinganga, selection of the members of the arbitration tribunal. In the GERD, they could be experts to the African Union that's mediating the dispute. And if so, then the question, if so, how can we announce such a role? What about the cost recovery, make a profit? Who pays? Do the bylaws need to be amended to reflect such a role? Those are some of the questions that I have been raising, and I raised in my commentary in Water International, and that's some of the questions that I would like to get more discussion on. So if we agree, then we at least have not all the details, but the basic details worked out. Thank you very much.
You finished ahead of time. Thank you. And if you'll stop sharing your screen, then we can all talk. And I'm going to ask any of the other panelists if they have some thoughts about whether IWRA would be an appropriate party to be involved in water disputes. Cecilia, I'm going to start with you because you have a longer history with IWRA. You've seen it through many evolutions. So I'd like to hear your viewpoint.
I do. I think that Salman proposal is feasible because the membership of the association the members of the association could work. It would be non-biased, hopefully. It would be impartial. It would be non-political. And I think that would be beneficial in every case. So I do think it's a very good idea. And of course, one has to see how to implement it. But it is. It is an association that was established, 50 years ago. It has a good reputation and is by people who work in the fields.
Salman is there you go. Thank you. Any other thoughts, Anita, Hussam?
Yes, maybe I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Salman and on the role the IWRA can have in facilitating conversations and bringing people together and facilitating regional cooperation. And I think this is something that it has already been doing through the journals. So, like for instance, like Water International is supporting rigorous research and publications on the topics with the peer review process, and so I think that's one direction. And the other one could be by trying to convening and bringing people together from different basins, and therefore allowing people from countries that do not really go along to come together in a I mean, we can say neutral forum. I mean, we can argue the concept of neutrality, but like bringing them together in providing them with a platform and a space where to meet and discuss and try to build dialogue and trust. I think that's a role that it could have.
Anita?
I mean, I think there's always an interesting question of how do you get the people on the ground to see IWRA as an organization they might go to be involved in this, and presenting and ensuring that IWRA retains its role and its identity as a group of experts and people that are interested in neutral role in influencing and providing information and insight and perhaps some guidance. But there, as mentioned by my colleagues on the panel, there are a number of opportunities around the world where people have brought together practitioners, not necessarily the highest level, but medium, high level, and low level people that are working on water within a country with other practitioners from other countries to engage in this dialogue, and that building the trust between them, as they're often the ones that are having the initial discussions anyway, to have them help to devise some possible solutions that can then filter up to the high level might be, I mean, I'm just suggesting this might be one approach that might be a starting point for thinking about that. As long as it takes a lot of work to plan a big workshop like this, but it could be quite interesting and quite useful.
Well, and I have a couple of questions, like what role should IWRA play? Should we be the convener as sort of the honest broker, or should we be the ones to provide expertise, like an expert witness or something like that? I guess you envision a number of different roles, and go ahead.
Yes, I do envision a number of roles, starting with the role that Anita mentioned about just bringing or putting on the table our good offices for the parties to sit down and talk, and then we listen to them and then try to provide some ideas. That could be one major role that we play, and I think it is an important role, and it could prove to be quite helpful because of the fact that we have 3,000 members, as I said, representing all the professions. Another role that we could play is perhaps when the parties themselves are looking for a third party to help. As I said, I gave the example of the Indus Waters Treaty, where if a difference arose and the parties are unable to resolve it, then they will. It becomes if the question arose, then it becomes a difference, and the difference has to be referred to a neutral expert who is a highly qualified engineer. And as I said, the process of choosing one has been quite difficult. And I thought when at the World Bank, I would just pick up the phone and talk to whoever in IWRA, say, look, we are really looking for a list of highly qualified engineers, and I'm sure you have the windows of the engineers, and if you could give us the list, 10 names. But then I wasn't sure whether IWRA would be willing to do it, whether they'd have to discuss and see are they getting involved in that dispute by providing the list. So I thought rather than doing it, I should first bring the idea and have it discussed within IWRA and see what reaction they would have before I pick up the phone and ask them to do that. The same thing with even the Permanent Court of Arbitrations that are formed in some of the treaties, like the Indus Water Treaty. They're not all lawyers. They talk about engineers, they talk about water experts, and in the Indus Water Treaty they have 7 and few lawyers and some engineers and some water experts. And again, how can we select who is in a better position to give a list of those experts? And I'm still thinking that IWRA could do that. And perhaps the dispute in the GERD, in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, that has been going on for a long time. It went to the Security Council, the only dispute that ever got to the Security Council, and the Security Council said, well, the African Union is there, let the African Union mediate the dispute, and the African Union put a panel of a few lawyers and experts. I'm not in a position, and I should really emphasize this, to pass a judgment whether it's the right panel or the right people. This is not my job. I don't have the authority to do that. But I had thought that the AU could just have picked up the phone and say, IWRA, I've been mediating this dispute. I need dam engineers, experts. I need some water resource specialist experts. I need some policy experts, water policy experts, and I need some lawyers. So those are the kind of roles. But I am not sure that I would like to go to the point of where IWRA would be the institution to resolve the dispute itself. So it's a facilitative role, starting from using its good offices through providing expertise, through mediating it, but through providing the expertise, but not to the point of becoming a judicial institution where it would pass the judgment.
And do you know of any other organizations that are serving the role that you're describing? Anita, you're shaking your head. You had the same question?
No, I was going to suggest it's not for water at all, but the US has what's called the Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution. They train mediators and facilitators, but in addition to that, what they have is they have a database, and anybody that has been selected through their process or reviewed and approved gets their name on the database as a potential mediator, facilitator, or expert. And then anybody within the United States is looking for people to play that role, to hire them as facilitators or mediators, or to have them engage in some sort of analysis, can look through this database of experts.
All right. Any other comments? No. We have a number of questions that have been posed, but to ensure that we don't run out of time for something that's very important. Scott, this is your last webinar for IWRA, and you have been involved in almost every webinar for 9 years. You've grown this program, and I want to thank you for everything that you have done, both personally and on behalf of IWRA. And I'd like to give you a few minutes to just say whatever you want to say.
Thank you so much, Renee. No, you're right. It has been quite a tenure here with the webinars. And, I think, I was thinking about it as you urged me earlier to kind of reflect on it. When we started these, webinars weren't really as common as they are these days. When we started, we had maybe, if we got 30 or 40 people to tune in, we were feeling really great about it. We said that was a good turnout. And now, like we were saying for today, we have over 200 people registered. So we've really been able to grow that. And I think that's really not really so much due to me, but, just part of the IWRA. We've kept growing as an organization. I know that our communications team has continued to build out the networks that they have, so that when the publicity goes out, it's not just only to our members now, but now we have a strong social media presence. We have a really strong ability to kind of work with other networks, other organizations, and that helps build our expertise, build our organization, which I think is really, really great. And it's been really special to be able to be with IWRA for so long, and to served on the 50th anniversary committee with you, and it was a pleasure to be able to lend my perspective on what the organization's been doing for so long. So it's really been special and really been enjoyable. And like you said, I think this is actually almost my 50th webinar with the organization. Wow. So this is going out on the 50s, I guess.
Anniversary.
Good number. Lucky number. So,
yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for everything.
Oh, of course, and we hope that you won't be a stranger. You're not going away. And I know that you're working on your PhD, so this may give you extra time to finish that up. I think all of us here have done our PhDs, and we know that the final push is truly the hardest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Is your PhD on the IWRA webinars?
No, unfortunately. Otherwise, they've had it completed a long time ago.
Okay.
All right. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and so I'm going to turn to some of the questions. And I think that the panelists are capable of typing answers to some of them. Okay. And I'm going to sort of bounce around. So apologies to those of you who post questions and you say, well, you didn't get to mine. I'm going to read the one that came in last, and then I'll bounce up to the top. The first one is for you, Hussam. And it's how can the framework of leadership of IWRM be established, especially given the transboundary nature of aquifers?
Yes, basically, I would suggest to go and read the paper that we just published that I mentioned earlier, and then we try to provide a framework of the different roles that the young people can play of leadership in shared water basins as well as the common challenges, but also opportunities that open up for young people. And so I would just refer you to the paper.
Okay. The next one is for you, Cecilia. Do you have any ideas if technologies to combat or adapt to climate change will also require more water? And if so, how do we balance everything? And that could be a question for the whole panel, actually.
Yes, so far the main initiative of the world is to become net zero, for which we don't need to use more water. We need billions of dollars, and we need to reprogram systems, and we need to have different institutions. So that itself is going to be a huge challenge. It's going to take very long, but I don't think water will be necessarily a concern.
Any other thoughts on that question? Okay. Here's one for you, Anita. How do you see the role of reverse osmosis, RO, systems in piped water?
So that question, I think that the role of RO is going to be very context dependent. It's mostly going to be used for adding additional supply where water supply is constrained. It's extremely energy intensive at the moment, and it leads to some questions about how to address the contaminants and the heavy metals and other things that might get removed from the water. I think that there are certain places around the world where it may be a necessity, and there are other ways in which there are other opportunities that will be more efficient, more effective, and perhaps a longer lasting. And so it's really going to depend on what we're talking about the use for.
Any other thoughts on that?
Just a brief comment. It's like Anita says, it's used mostly for supply, and it is used, for example, for recycled wastewater for potable uses. And yes, it is very energy intensive. Singapore, as well as other cities, are working on how to reduce energy use, because that is what will allow it is needed. It's a process that you need, but you need to make it less energy intensive, and you need to work on the brine, on the components of it.
And I know that some questions have been put in the chat. Sorry, there are more than 70 comments in the chat. I just can't go through all of them right now. But Salman, here is a question for you. What about the dispute between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan regarding the GERD? And you were saying before we started the webinar that apparently the dam has now been completed. And
No. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, the dam had been completed, but it had started generating electricity as of yesterday. The bottom turbine, the lowest turbine was operational, and it was announced officially. It was inaugurated formally. The Prime Minister was there, a huge crowd was there, and it was on TV and on all the networks. They said that they have generated 375 megawatt of electricity from one turbine. Of course, this is the 11th year of the project. The project started in 2011, and now we're in 2022, and it's a major milestone in the history of the Nile and the history of the dispute itself. And the first reaction came from Egypt, who denounced the inauguration of the project before reaching a final agreement between the parties. Sudan followed suit, and Ethiopia said, look, I've been negotiating with you for a long time. I cannot wait forever. And there are contractual obligations, and there are funding issues, and there are so many issues that we have to stick to the schedule. So, I mean, yes, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has started generating electricity, but the dispute is far from over, and still we have to the AU is mediating it, but now with the problems in Sudan and the problems in Ethiopia, the AU is unable to move because of the sanctions against Sudan and the war in Ethiopia and the problems. So, but I think that gets us back to my question: can IWRA play any role in trying to finalize agreement on the last points? Because basically Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt have agreed to the dam. They have signed an agreement in 2015. And now the issue is not whether the dam should be completed or not. The issue of whether the kind of details that were about the 2015 agreement that the Ethiopia says the agreement allows it to go ahead, and so Sudan Egypt says no, we are not allowed to go ahead until we finalize the details about the information that you are supposed to furnish to us before and during the operation of the dam. So I believe that we meaning the IWRA, can play a role, facilitative role, using our good offices and using our huge and wide experience staff to try to assist the AU. We are not pulling the carpet from the AU. AU is the one who's mediating, but we can offer our assistance to AU by saying that, look, we can offer our experience, our good offices, our knowledge, and our staff to try to resolve the remaining issues.
Yeah, one of the questions was, should we consider new systemic models? And I guess to the extent that we have systems experts within IWRA, then we could offer that expertise as well. And another one of the questions was about the ongoing disputes between India and Pakistan. So in your mind, IWRA could play a role in any one of the disputes by providing expertise as needed.
I think in that case, probably we have a better entry point than in any other disputes, because the Indus Waters Treaty says when an issue arises between the two countries that they will try to resolve it through Indus Water Commission. And if the commission is unable to resolve the issue, at that point it's called a question, which is very interesting. The norms: question, difference, dispute. Start with a question. If it's not resolved, become a difference. If it's not resolved, then we move to the third layer of dispute. So the question, the second layer is that if the commission is unable to resolve the dispute, the issue, then they will try to agree on a third party to refer it to. And here I think this issue of referring to a third party, we could be that third party because it's a technical at that point. It's not really a legal issue. And if they cannot agree on a third party to refer the dispute to, then they will try to agree on a third party to appoint a neutral expert. So there are two openings for IWRA to get into. Either it itself becomes that neutral expert, or appoint a neutral expert, or be that neutral expert, or appoint a neutral expert. So there are two entry points. And in the case of the Baglihar, as I said, we had faced lots of difficulty. It took a long time. It was a complex issue. I had to handle it. And finally, we managed to get a really very highly qualified engineer who managed to resolve the issue. Of course, not to the full satisfaction of the parties, but I think all the observers were agreed that it was a fair judgment and very professional judgment. So I think I do hope that we'll be able to look into the issue and see how we can announce our presence in this area and draw a roadmap for what to do and how to do it.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have 1 minute left, believe it or not. Those 90 minutes flew by. So I would like to thank all of you for participating as panelists, and also thank our audience for giving us the gift of your time and attention. Scott, do you have any final remarks that you would like to make?
Well, we just have to always like to wrap up and just thank everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today. So this has really been a great webinar, and so a big thank you to Cecilia Tortajada, Professor of Practice in Environmental Innovation at the University of Glasgow, Anita Milman, Associate Professor at the University of Amherst, Hussam Hussein, who's a lecturer and a research fellow at the University of Oxford, and Salman Salman, who's chair of the University of Khartoum Council. And finally, thank you to Renee for your great moderation. Many hats that you wear, including being the treasurer of IWRA. So, I think I found the insights provided by our panel really inspiring and a really nice way to kind of frame out the future of water and the future of the organization. So we had a great time. I think, myself and Renee and the others, several of you panelists were on the 50th anniversary committee. And IWRA has been around for 50 years now. Now we're moving into our 51st year. So, member-orientated, a member-run, a member-dependent organization. So, we really encourage, if you're interested, to go to www.iwra.org to learn more about the association and where to become a member. Now, I know that it's been a couple of people who posed the question, and we always have the recording, and we'll have the PowerPoint slides up as well in a few days. So, for me, myself, and on behalf of the whole IWRA office, we really thank everybody for viewing the webinar today. Thank you.
And thank you, Scott, for everything that you have done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Renee, and thank you to everybody.
Thanks.